Now, live from the US, we will hear words from Michael Lurie, writer, speaker, and partner at McKinsey & Company, and Bill Anderson, CEO of Roche Pharmaceuticals.
Wonderful. Well, hello, everybody, and great to be with you. I'm Michael Lurie, and let me take a minute to introduce Bill, who's a good friend and colleague. So Bill is CEO of Roche Pharmaceuticals, a member of the Roche Executive Committee, and he leads an organization of 55,000 people. He's been leading an amazing transformation at Roche over the last 5 or 6 years, with a real aspiration to bring enormous value and impact to patients and the healthcare systems around the world. We're truly thrilled and excited to have Bill with us today. And Bill, would love to start out and perhaps you can give us a little summary, a high-level overview of what the journey at Roche has looked like over the last several years.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks to everyone in the audience for your interest in the topic. I think it's something that is, as we just heard from the last group, this is it's not an easy thing, especially if you take a company that's used to doing things the more traditional way, and you're trying to change that. That's very unsettling. But maybe I could tell you a little bit of the background. And by the way, just in case anyone's curious, so Michael's in California, but I'm actually in Basel, Switzerland. So that's why it's nice and daylight here. But anyway, how this gets started. We had some major business challenges. We were going from a period where we had 50% of our revenue coming from 3 big products, and those 3 products were going to go away due to loss of patents and things, and we were going to need to replace them, not with 3 products, but with 15 or 20 medicines. And so on the one hand, we had kind of a big expansion in terms of the complexity and the requirements from the external environment. But at the same time, we needed to be in a much leaner manner and just to be much quicker to respond because the dynamics of the market's changing and things. And so we realized that the old setup we had just wasn't going to get us there. And that was kind of the external challenge. At the same time, I was incoming CEO of Genentech, which is the U.S. division of Roche Pharmaceuticals, and I was making the rounds and talking to people. I had been with the company for a decade at that point, but I had been in another division. I was coming back as the CEO of Genentech, and so I thought, I need to find out what's going on, what's on people's minds. And I talked to people, and what I heard from people, whether they were frontline workers or senior executives or anywhere in between, was a very similar themes. People, they loved the medicines we make and the benefits for patients. They loved the cool science, the supportive culture. That was all great. But they always then said, but I can't get anything done. Can you fix that? And I was like, oh, that's a problem. Can't get anything done. Yeah. Wow. Now, if I had been new to the company, I would have thought, oh, if they can't get things done, sounds like there's too much bureaucracy. We'll get some little teams, and we'll figure out how to simplify processes and break bureaucracy, and we'll fix this. But here's the problem, and I think, Michael, you know this. For the decade before that, we had been doing almost nothing but breaking bureaucracy. And so it was sort of like, we're putting all our energy into simplify processes, break bureaucracy, and we're actually going backwards. It's not working. And that led to really this profound realization that as sincere and earnest as the leaders were about making, simplifying things, making it easier for people to get things done, empowering people, that we were losing. And if if you're consistently losing at a game, then at some point you have to decide we got to play a different game. And that's how we decided, well, we've really got to chuck the old rule book and we've got to go for some really radically different solutions. And frankly, everything's on the table. There's nothing sacred. And so that was 6 years ago. And since that time, we've done a lot of experimentation. We've benefited a lot from some exemplar companies like Hire that you just heard from, GE Appliances, which is now a part of Hire. I mean, other exemplars that are familiar probably to many people in the audience. But the thing was, none of those companies were really in our field of making medicines or making diagnostics. And so we've had to do a lot of translation, and you can't just take the solution that's working in a white goods manufacturing company and import it into a product area like ours, where we have say 20-year life cycles instead of 1-year life cycles. You have to take the concepts and then kind of figure out how they might translate. And so it's been quite a journey of trial and error and adjustment. But we're now at a place where we have substantial parts of the organization where their whole mode of working has changed. We have we started out by introducing operating principles that were sort of for everyone, just to give a sense of like what behaviors and habits are key things and what are things we're not going to do. We implemented something I think, Michael, you're going to talk more about. We implemented this new approach to leadership to replace command and control with vision, architect, catalyst, coach. So that's been a journey as well. It's easy to say it. It's another thing to train it and then to practice it. Third, we implemented a sort of a framework for one of the fundamental things in any company is how are priorities set and how are resources assigned? People, money. We call the VITAL framework. We can talk about that more if we like. But the basics idea of VITAL is you don't do anything that isn't driving the vision. That's the V. I is for improvement. And improvement means, if we need to do something next year that we did this year, we need to do it with 20% fewer resources. We need to do it better. We have humans working in our company, and they can learn, and they will innovate, and they will improve. The T is for talent flow. It's what typically doesn't happen in large organizations. People are basically trapped by their cost center, by their manager, by their whatever, and we need to see talent flowing regularly. And so that's the T. A is accountability, and especially peer accountability, but replacing old mechanisms like a priori targets, that are gamed, and then, a race to beat them. We say, hey, you go and you do what is best for patients and customers. You drive innovation, you make good use of company resources, and we'll talk about how you did later. There's sort of no reliable target that you can hide behind. And finally, fifth is lucidity. That's the L. So VITAL, that's been a big part. And then finally, the last element, and one that's really helped tie it all together, is a methodology called outcomes-based planning, which we're doing at the top levels. So, for example, the pharma leadership team, my leadership team, we're on 90-day cycles. We have long-term targets, or long-term goals, outcomes. We have midterm, so like 5-year, and then we have 90-day or 180-day outcomes that we're driving, and everybody is part of this, and that's part of what drives those things in that VITAL model. So these are the core elements, and now it's about practice and adapting. But it's made a huge difference, and we've increased during this time. We've increased our responsiveness significantly, but we've also increased our productivity in every part of the organization from between 25 and 100%. And it's making a huge difference for now and the future. So yeah, I guess that's sort of a summary of where we've been, Michael.
Wonderful. Thanks, Bill. There's so much to unpack there. But one thing just to hone in on, which you mentioned briefly, is this kind of new approach to leadership. So I just want to share this slide quickly. You see that okay?
Yep.
So for those who were there, I spoke about this last year at our virtual session. And just a quick reminder, this is really a significant evolution of leadership that we've been developing over the last several years. At the bottom, you see this notion of going beyond expectations to wholeness. So this is really the foundation. Leaders becoming more self-aware, more conscious, and recognizing that frequently we're operating in a more sort of limited, reactive mindset, and shifting to be our whole authentic selves with more of a enabling or creative or growth mindset. At the top is the shift from, executives really focusing on delivering profits to visionaries thinking about all stakeholders and creating impact for all stakeholders. And then in the middle, the three kind of core shifts of beyond competition to co-creation. So this is really a shift in the business system from thinking about, a win-lose sort of more red ocean type approach to really thinking much more imaginatively about reimagining the business system and acting as an architect to shape that together with a broader ecosystem. Shifting from a hierarchy to a network, there's the shift from director to catalyst, and going beyond, controller, as Bill, as you were just saying, to operating in rapid learning cycles with leaders showing up as coaches. And you see underlying all of these is a fundamental shift in mindset. Bill, as you began the journey, one of the things that Roche chose to do to begin the journey was to invite all leaders to go through a foundational experience to get introduced to these new mindsets and principles of agility that was called kinesis. And I remember that's where we first met as you went through one of those sessions. It was positioned as an invitation, not an expectation. That senior leaders were invited to come to this, and were asked to come to this, but we're not required to do anything with it. They were kind of required to show up, but then once they'd done that, it was an invitation that they could do with it what they wanted. But there wasn't an expectation that they would do anything with it. So it was very much put at the choice of the senior leader. You were one of the first, in one of those early cohorts that you kind of came out of that, I remember, on fire. It was very, very much aligned with what you were already thinking, kind of energized you. And that's when you went back to and started launching kind of the transformation of Genentech, which is one of the first pieces of Roche, which really undertook a serious transformation. I'm just sharing that for context for folks who to understand that kind of starting point. I'm very curious to get your thoughts on, what does it take to shift the mindsets of leaders, to invite leaders to start embracing this, and how did that sort of unfold, recognizing it's, it didn't all happen at one time, right? It's been a process that unfolded over a number of years, actually.
Yeah, I think there were two elements, two things that really drove the motivation of leaders at our company, and I would include myself in this for sure. One of them was a real question of hey, is there a better way? And a conviction that the way we're doing things just isn't that good. I mean, and the way I would put it, the old way of doing things was very much turning the crank. You had these were the titles we used. You had the financial processes, you had the people process, you had the business performance process, and these things were very much like on the calendar. Every year, pretty much the same. And, it's sort of like, oh, it's October, it's time to do the budget for the next year. Oh, it's February, it's time to do the performance rankings and et cetera. And you had this whole thing of running things up and down the hierarchy. Everything needed to be approved up the line, and then you cascaded things down the organization, and just this whole rhythm and mechanics of running a large organization that was kind of on an annual calendar. It was quite static. You just kind of went up the hill and down the hill every year, up the hill and down the hill. And, and the big debates were over things like, okay, should the sales target for next year be 6% or 7%? And you could spend a day on that. And so for the question to go, hey, is that really, is that the best we can do? And for people to, and again, especially for the senior leaders to say, hey, there's got to be something that's more dynamic, that's less soul sucking, and more empowering of people in the organization. And so I think that was one thing. And then the second factor that was important was we had a lot of people who had been with the company for some time, and we were kind of able to come together in rooms in places like the sessions you described in Kinesis, and sort of look each other in the eye and say, hey, do we have the self-respect to and respect for each other to believe in each other enough that we can do it differently and take a risk? So yeah, I think there's no amount of these sort of training courses and things that can create the motivation. They can help point the way, but there has to be something that happens in the gut. Because believe me, and you know this because you've observed it. I mean, this is not the easy course. I mean, this has been 6 years of a lot of disruption, a lot of type 2 thinking. All the meetings became much more challenging. In the old way, for example, I described, you have these meetings, like we all know, oh, this is the meeting, this is the 2-day meeting where we review and endorse the long-range revenue forecast, just like we did the last 5 years. That it's, okay, yeah, you have to debate things, you have to look at a lot of numbers, but frankly, once you've done that a few times, it's pretty easy. Now we're saying, oh, no, we're not doing that anymore. We're going to do that exercise. We're going to do in an hour instead of 2 days. And we're going to take the 16 hours we gain back, and we're going to fix this or that process and figure out, why do we need so many managers to get such and such done? It's a very different assignment.
Well, one of the things that was really fascinating about Roche is you really approach the transformation in more of an emergent way. In other words, it wasn't like the executive committee came up with a master plan, or there was some central transformation group that was trying to transform the whole enterprise. Rather, again, it was really building on your culture of decentralization and distributed authority, to encourage the sort of early adopters, if you will, like yourself and others, to lean in, and then over time, more and more of the organization got excited about and started adopting these new ways of working, until you got to a point where it was really happening at an enterprise-wide level. Would love your reflections on that and why it was important to do it that way within Roche.
Well, I'm not sure that's the only way to do it. I mean, I think, okay, so let me separate that in 2 parts. You talked about it being emergent, and you talked about it being, you didn't use the word viral, but a little bit, instead of it being from the highest level up and flowing down, it did kind of emerge in a few places and then spread. So in terms of it being emergent, And what do we mean by that? Is that just some fancy word? A simple way to say it is, when we started on this, we had the problem statement that I described, that basically people couldn't get anything done, and we've been trying to improve that for a decade without success. So we had the problem statement, and we knew, it's not going to be an iteration of the current system that's going to solve it. That's about all we knew. Oh, and a belief that it could be better. So we had those three things, and that's all we had. Like, you're going on a journey. That's all you got in your pack. So you don't know where the destination is, what it looks like, how to get there. You're just setting off on a journey to get somewhere better than that. And so then there's the inevitable questions. Well, people want to know, well, what does this new way look like? Don't know, but it's going to be great. People are going to have more individual autonomy and authority, but it's going to feature discipline. It can't be chaos. There has to be a discipline and a mutual understanding, but there's going to be more, individual choice and empowerment. Okay. How do we get there? We don't know, but it's going to be different than what we've done before. Oh, okay. How long is it going to take? I mean, is this like a 6-month program, or is it longer? And it's like, longer. How long? Have no idea. How can you know how long something's going to take? And believe me, by the way, in the traditional system, that's almost the most painful thing, because whenever there's a difficult sort of change process, the first thing people want to know is like, okay, well, how bad is it going to be, and how long is it going to take? But especially, how long is it going to take? Because we just got to weather the storm, and I just want to know, is this like 6 months and then we can get back to normal? And so, yeah, we had to tell people that, like, we have no idea. Now we've stopped saying that. We're now saying, hey, we can see the destination, and we know that because we've got people that are there. We have countries, we have functions. They are doing this. They're living it. They're empowered. They've got dramatically better productivity, but the personal sense of fulfillment in work is amazing. So now we're saying, hey, here's the path. Here's the elements that I described, those 4 elements, and it takes practice. You got to implement and practice, and you get there. And so that's the path. And we can say, yeah, from the time you start to implement those 4 things in earnest, you're making progress within 6 months, and within 12 to 18 months, people are feeling it. I mean, it's good. You're achieving results, and you're no longer in a kind of massive change program. You're practicing a new discipline and living a new way of working. The part about kind of viral versus top down or something, I would simply say, if you're in a company and your leaders aren't committed to doing this, go somewhere else. If you care about this, because it ain't going to happen. There's a lot of things where senior leaders have to be on board. And if they're not, I mean, you can experiment in your local plant or your local department, and you can make some progress. But if you don't have support in high levels, it'll run its course, and it'll be extinguished. So that would be my sense on that. But Michael, you've seen more environments, so maybe you have a different view on that.
I completely agree. So one of the things you articulated, after a while, it wasn't like the first thing, but it emerged, and I guess you developed a real sense that it was needed, was a very bold aspiration, a real vision, the V of your vital model, if you will, which then later got adopted. Essentially, a version of it got adopted by the whole enterprise. Wonder if you'd care to kind of share, what led to that, and why it was important to have such an aspirational vision, and the impact that had in sort of energizing and focusing the transformation.
Yeah, it's true. That has been an amazing rallying point for both the ongoing work, and the transformation work, which is, again, we talked about vision. Vision is the V in VACC leadership, visionary, and V is the V in vital. And I mean, there's a reason it shows up in two places. I mean, this is just so big. By the way, I have this even when I'm traveling. There's a hotel I've stayed in a number of times, and over the years. And at a point, I noticed that, this was a hotel. It was a very nice hotel, a lovely hotel, and a beautiful old building, and wonderful location. But the food, the service, it was just okay. And then I noticed after a few years of visiting there, with some regularity, that wow, all of a sudden the food, the service, everything was amazing. It was excellent. And the really key thing that I noticed but the personnel was the same. It was the same waiters and people at the front desk and so I said, I got to find out who's running this place, because I have a feeling. And so I asked to meet the general manager, and I got to know her. And sure enough, she started about 2 months before I noticed the change, and boom, and so I asked her, and she said, yeah, well, we have a real focus now of, we want every guest, we want them to have a special memory. And we want our staff to be really creative in thinking about what that special memory could be. Could it be the memory they have when they first walked in the door? Could it be the memory they had when they got that first taste of food, or whatever it was? And it's almost like a competition. Everyone has to figure out what could be the most special memory. And so that was a vision. That's a vision. I love that, because it's not just something you put on your website, but it catalyzes action. It captivates the imagination of people, and it drives them to do something that's great. So we said, what could be a vision for our company that would be that kind of vision? And again, we had a group that was very mature, and people who had been with the company for some time. So that's not as easy when you've been there. You kind of tried a lot of that stuff. You've had slogans and you've had campaigns, and right. But we basically kind of locked ourselves in a room for a day, and we sort of brainstormed on this. And where we ended up was, first we said, we want to deliver. We don't want to deliver 20% more medicines or something. To make this worth our time and everybody else that works here, to make it worth it, we want to deliver 3 to 5 times more benefit to patients over the next decade than we did in the past decade. And we said we're going to do that by delivering twice as many medicines, and we want to make, on average, each of those medicines has about twice as big of value in terms of what it does. Okay, so 2 times 2 is 4. We said 3 to 5. It's not that precise. Okay, 3 to 5 times the patient benefit. And the reason we chose that was, we said, man, that is. We said, is that impossible? And we did all the math, and we basically figured out it's almost impossible that we could do that, but it's not totally impossible. It's just almost impossible. And we said, yeah, that sounds like what we want to do. It needs to be that hard, that it's going to take everything we have and going to stretch us beyond what we could think would be reasonable. Okay. And so we went home that night and we thought, oh, this is great. This is great. And we came in the next morning and somebody said, I just don't feel that good about this vision. And we're like, oh man, why? And he said, well, healthcare systems around the world are struggling to pay the bills, to make the budgets work. And don't we need to do something? I mean, it's great we want to do that for patients, but what are we doing for society beyond the help we give for patients? And we said, we ought to be doing something about that too. So we decided we're gonna aspire to deliver 3 to 5 times the patient benefit at half the cost to society, and we can do that by having more medicines and having lower prices. We can do that by delivering bigger benefits. We can do that by going for curative therapies instead of just ones that sort of treat the disease. However we going to do it, we can do it by having lower environmental impacts. Okay, but that's how we came to this vision, and it's super important because everybody in our enterprise every day ought to be able to see how the thing they're doing is going to help us achieve that goal. And basically, we tell people, hey, if the thing you're doing, if you can't see how it's delivering on that, then stop doing it. Talk to somebody, talk to a colleague, like, hey, because that's the thing we're here to do. And anything we're doing that doesn't drive that, we stop. And by the way, we got rid of tons of work, and we're still getting rid of work. But things like we realized we're spending huge amounts of time doing things like forecasts. And we said, wow, are all those forecasts, are they delivering 3 to 5 times the patient benefit at half the cost of society? No. Boom, we're done. We're doing all kinds of monthly things in finance, monthly, but reporting results quarterly. Why do we need to do all those things monthly? Triggers a huge amount of work. And these are just a couple examples, but there's tons of things like that. So that's vision.
Super inspiring. Let me ask you one more question, and then we're going to open it up to the panel. One of the things that Roche has really paid attention to is culture. So it's it comes up a lot, and anybody who's involved in agility, that this new way of working is more about a kind of a state of mind and a way of behaving than all of the architecture elements, although those are also critically important, of course. Why was culture important, and what are some of the things you've done to help, evolve the culture of the organization?
Yeah, sure. In your leadership model, you mentioned VACCH, and the H was human, and we didn't call that out because at Roche that's deeply embedded. Anyone who's worked here knows this is a company where people they care about the coworkers, they care about their colleagues. That's one of the reasons I joined. I've been in sharp-elbowed environments where you never know where the next knife is going to come from, and people at Roche no, we just don't do that. That's just not that's not okay. So I think it's important to stress, if you're going to attempt a major business transformation of the sort I'm describing, you got to start with that kind of trust and care, because so much of what we're trying to do relies on some basic assumptions that, hey, people are here to support each other and doing something important for the world, right? And if you don't have a foundation of that, you can't take a lot of the risks we've taken. I'll give you an example. At one point along, we realized that the budget process was so stifling that we killed budgets. So large parts of the organization, we said, no budget. You spend what you need, and we'll talk about it later. Well, boy, you can't do that without a lot of trust. By the way, when we did that, spending went down immediately. Now, after that, we had some, we had some learnings about the need for framework, but having that kind of trust that people are going to do the right thing, people are going to support their colleagues, that's a big one. I think in terms of evolving the culture, sometimes our niceness can turn into maybe complacency with regard to improving each other. And so we put in our operating principles, we said, embrace differences. I seek diverse perspectives, invite opposing views, and challenge myself and others. And we said, challenge myself and others. We're not so good at challenging others here. And so that's an example. But the culture is a huge part, and that's something we tend to a lot.
Beautiful. Let's do we have our panel in place, and shall we open up to questions from others?
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Thank you, Michael. We now invite members from the Fortnight Council for the World Agility Forum to ask some questions.
So let me start by saying how wonderful the presentation was and how inspiring. I was curious, you're a global company and you worked, as I understand it, in both Europe and the US. Would you like to say anything about cultural differences between two areas, maybe within Roche and beyond Roche? Because often it's suggested that there are big differences between those two areas. I'm wondering what your thought is on that.
Yeah, so our operations, we have in Roche Pharmaceuticals, we have major sites in Switzerland, Germany, in the San Francisco Bay Area, in the London area, in Toronto and Shanghai. I think those are probably the biggest sites. And so we had to encounter that early on, like, how's this going to translate in different cultures? And I have to say, it would be very difficult for me to make any useful generalizations about how it's translated. If anything, I would say the difference between any two leaders has been greater than the differences we see between any sites. We've had leaders who were very slow to embrace these things. They just, they'd just been, maybe they'd just been jaundiced by one too many change initiatives in their career, and they failed to see how this was different. Like, we had re-engineering, we had operational excellence, various things where we cut out layers or we increase spans of control. And they said, yeah, we hear all this talk about teal and agile, but really it's the world's not changing. And we had leaders like that in every country. Not so many, but we had some. And some of them came around, and some didn't. But so I wish I had some great anecdotes and I could say, oh wow, in Germany it was so different than in San Francisco, which was so different than somewhere else. But I don't really see it. I don't know, Michael. You've been a partner for a bit of this. What would you say?
I fully agree. I would just add also, you have commercial operations, not at the same scale as what you mentioned, in 140 countries, right? So we've had people all over the world from every different background embrace this, and I fully concur with what you're saying. Like, I think there's no evidence whatsoever that there's any difference in sort of national culture or sort of background from that point of view. It's much more about the people and the leaders. And we've seen, early adopters of this in places that, from a traditional Western perspective might have been unexpected, but and people in, California who were like quite resistant. It's very much down to the people. Fully agree.
Yeah, I had a couple convicting moments when I traveled to a couple of countries that I won't mention, but where people dress very differently and have very different customs and different religion. And I thought, I wonder how this is going to be, and wow. And then getting there and finding out, like, not only had they embraced some of these ideas, but they were advancing them in faster pace than I was on. And they were just on fire. And I was like, okay, what a fool I am. Really check your assumptions there, Bill.
So I'd love to know, in the transition from the way that you were working to the way that you are working, very classically, especially in healthcare, pharma in particular, your measure of career success is going up some kind of career ladder. that you're moving upward, as it were. And when I ask people in those sectors, what's your goal, what's your dream, and they'll say something like, well, I want to be a level 2, category E, 204B, and you're like, oh, so it's very hierarchical. And one of the challenges, I think, in moving the entire organization from that being the measure of success to some different measure of success, you're kind of taking away that certainty about, I will have made it when, or I'm, in 18 months, I'm getting this promotion to this next role. And I just wonder how you're navigating that, because you've got the whole organization that's kind of been trained in one way of working, and now we're asking them to do something quite different.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's probably the most frequently asked question in the second half of our transformation. In the first half of the transformation, I don't think people had looked forward enough to figured out how much roles were going to change. It was still a question, but in the second half, it's like really apparent. And this week alone, I spent time with some of the leadership team reviewing the progress in one of our key departments on transformation and what they're doing, and it was really mind-blowing, the changes they had made. So this was an organization where they had gone from a lot of kind of small hierarchies, where you had sort of like a director, an associate director, senior product manager, junior product manager, those kind of columns where lots of sort of people managers with very narrow spans of control and high level of kind of owning people or owning roles. And basically we split that all up, and we end up with, I think, 52 individual contributor positions in a community with 3 chapter leads. So you can imagine in that realignment, there was a tremendous number of people who used to have a direct report who no longer do. And then there's 3 people with 17 direct reports on average each. So we went from a span of control of like 2 to a span of control of 17 in this example. And that was one of the questions I asked them, like, how has that gone over? And there were 2 answers. One is, there was a lot of resistance to doing it, and it was very difficult to convince people that it was the right thing to do. And at a point, we just had to do it. This is what they told us. And that there were some people for which that was a bridge too far, and they're like, hey, I'm out of here. But there were a lot of people who could just see, hey, this is the way to go. This is how to increase our impact. Those 52 people, they're working on multiple work packages. Their job changes. It's not a fixed pattern, but it could be every 6 months, every 9 months. They're getting both continuity of, say, a certain product, but they're also getting to work on other products or other therapy areas. And the overall effect is it's a much higher impact, much more varied and exciting experience. And that's the trade-off, is that there's fewer people that can put on their resume, I managed 3 people. And so it is a job we have in this transition period. And I say any companies that are trying to do this, we have to convince people this is a better way. You're going to have a bigger impact in the world. You're going to have a great career. We're still going to need senior leaders. We're still going to need, and by the way, we're never going to hire senior leaders from an environment where they haven't done this, because they wouldn't know what to do. So you people that are doing this and experiencing this and living it and implementing it, you are our senior leaders of the future, but it's different.
Question. We've seen other places where a visionary leader like yourself can establish this kind of a culture, and yet during management transitions, sometimes people have a tendency to go back to old ways of working. And you were just talking about hiring senior leaders, and I'm wondering how confident you are that this has reached critical mass inside pharmaceuticals now that could survive a management transition. And second of all, what do you see in terms of it spreading beyond the pharmaceuticals business to other parts of the company, maybe with people that have less confidence, less knowledge of this way of working?
Well, as Michael mentioned, the movement started to spring up in different places in the company, and so it's gone a long way in other parts of the company as well. I'm sharing the experience in pharmaceuticals, but by no means is that's definitely not the limits. And there have been amazing progress in the diagnostics division, in areas like finance and human resources, legal. So it's not it's not limited in that way. I think if a few key leaders had left after 2 or 3 years in, I think it could have collapsed. The fact is, we've had a number of people who've been working on this for 6 years, 5 years, 4 years. And by the way, sometimes when we have these review sessions, we're looking at a country or a major department, so sort of reviewing how's it going. And sometimes we'll get in this thing where we're like, oh, it's all the problems. Like, oh, here's all the things that aren't working, or they're not working yet, or we don't know how to solve, right? And then sometimes if it gets really low, then we'll say, well, should we go back to the old way? And people are like, no way, are you crazy? So I think there is definitely a tipping point that occurs, and I think we're past it. I think we're well past it, but it's a good question. You can't, anyone who thinks they can implement something like this in 2 years or something, like, forget it. Don't even bother. If you thought, oh, I'm going to be leading this organization for the next 3 years and I'm going to implement this before I go, I don't know. I'm not sure I'd advise that.
I have a question that's based on the assumption that part of the success that you've had in this transformation was the fact that it was driven from the bottom up, and that the groups that were bringing it to your attention and the groups that were pushing this up, I mean, obviously had the motivation. So correct me if I'm wrong in that assumption in the question I'm about to ask you, but would you think that, or the question I have is, what was their motivation for wanting to bring that change to the point where they percolated it up? And then as a leader, what did you learn by engaging with them that you, like, how did you connect the dots? When you talked to the second team? Was it the third team? Was it the 20th team? Like, how did you were able to connect those dots?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I would have to correct a misperception. I definitely wouldn't describe it as bottom up. What I would, and I wouldn't say it was top down either. It was really an intersection of voices from all levels in the organization. I'll give you an example. One of the places where things were the most broken was in the customer interface. And we were hearing for years from salespeople, reimbursement specialists, medical education people, all the people in the field. We were hearing, hey, our jobs are too small. We're in silos. We're not providing the customers what they need. And somehow in the bureaucratic approach, somehow those voices just couldn't break through. I mean, we heard them, but we just didn't know what to do. And we had to flip things, we had to really flip things on their head to say, we're going to put the customer in the center. One of our fundamentals is to put what we call the mission element. We're on a mission. We're going to deliver 3 to 5 times the patient benefit at half the cost of society. So if you're talking about the field interface, what's the mission element? We say, well, that's the doctor or the nurse or the patient. We're going to put them in the center. We're going to force our organization, our approach has to basically adapt to them, rather than saying, hey, here's our divisions, here's our structure. Now we're going to go out to the customer. So we listened to the voices, and we made the voices from the people at the line, the people in the field, the scientists, the people doing the work. We created the conditions where their voices could no longer be ignored. That when they said this isn't working or we need this, like, we must do that. So I'd say it was top down in the sense that the senior leaders decided we're changing the way this place works, and we are going to serve the people at the top are going to serve the people at the bottom. So that part was top down, and then the bottom up was the voices and the creativity and the ingenuity about how to change things. I hope that helps answer the question.
It actually changes my perception. So thank you for clearing up, because it sounds to me like at the top as leaders, you created the environment for the rest of the organization to actually really go back to you with those suggestions and with those, to percolate all the ideas back up, as opposed to just saying, this is what we're doing from the top down. You created that environment, as you just mentioned, and then you let it all percolate up.
And I would just say, though, it's I wish I could say, like in green, if folks are familiar with the colors, in green you sort of say, oh, we just hire great people and get out of their way. That doesn't work. A bureaucracy is much too powerful, and it will stifle the work of, the efforts of people to fix things or find solutions. And by the way, people don't just need you to break the bureaucracy. They need you to put in place an alternative framework that allows 50,000 people to work in concert. Because if you have 50,000 people and there's no framework, and you're just like, oh, well, leadership just gets out of their way, that's a formula for chaos and anarchy, and that won't work either. So you've got to have discipline, you've got to have frameworks, and senior leaders have to put that stuff in place. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the solutions come from the folks that are doing the work.
Maybe one thing I would add, from just having the opportunity to view it from the outside, with a global organization the size of Roche. So you've got different levels of this emerging. So right at the beginning, the group CEO and executive committee supported a transformation, but gave no detailed direction to it at all. In fact, they deliberately chose not to, and wanted to invite hundreds of senior leaders across the enterprise to kind of step forward. And so you have several dozen units that are pretty sizable. The unit that Bill, you were leading several years ago, was about 3,000 people, and there's many units of that size kind of across the organization. And so a lot of this started happening at sort of a unit level. So it wasn't bottom up in the sense of a team. It was more like the leadership of a unit of several thousand people would start thinking and started a journey. And then there was a lot of bottom up even within that unit, like you were saying, from the front line. So these sort of two levels of distribution essentially to kind of think about. And over time that sort of coalesced, but it did mean that there's several hundred senior leaders across the enterprise have been really at the core of this, and then engaging tens of thousands of others to really allow this to unfold. It's probably a better way to think about it. Very little bit of, it was guided by and informed by and supported by the sort of enterprise leadership team, but very little of it was directed or kind of dictated by the enterprise leadership team. Bill, would that be a fair way to describe it?
Yeah, I think you said it just right.
Could we take one or two questions from the audience?
Yes, any questions?
Hi, my name is Natalia. Thank you very much for this inspirational talk, and I actually have two questions. First one, you be talking about we, and when we're talking about the transformation like this, who was actually the drivers in this first phase of transformation? Whether was this like some kind of a change agents that you thought about? Was this a leaders itself? Have you trained them in the beginning? Like who? Because yes, the decision and motivation was top down and bottom up, but who was actually driving this in the beginning? This is the first question. And the second one is whether pandemic times changed something in the ongoing transformation. Because as we know, some people, for example, went hybrid, some went remote. It pretty much affected the whole work for lots of organizations, and whether it changed something in the transformation ongoing in your company. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. I think who led in the beginning was certain key leaders, and I say that because it wasn't a bunch of leadership teams in the beginning. There were certain key leaders who just saw an opportunity that things could be better. And as I said, as a business, we were facing kind of a generational challenge, and so there was a lot of emphasis on what could we do differently. I mean, I described my own personal journey with that, but there were several others who just got convicted of the need to change, the opportunity, and basically just started running with it. Those were the seeds of it. And it wasn't somebody in the transformation department, because there wasn't any transformation department in the beginning. There wasn't a change department or a strategy department, or it wasn't someone from the HR department, or it was business owners of one sort or another. And I emphasize that because I'm sure there were lots of people in other places who had lots of ideas, who were reading books like Reinventing Organizations and saying, man, why can't we do this here? But the level of change required and the number of people who have to radically adjust their lives in order to do this is such that it takes a big push over the top by some people that have the formal authority to do it. And so there have been amazing contributions from many, many others, but you have to have somebody and some buddies in senior positions that are willing to put their full heft behind it, because it is super hard. and it's just, that would be. And then with respect to the pandemic, I'm not sure I have much interesting to add. I don't know if Michael, if you have any views on that. One observation I would make is that the remote format, Zoom calls with leadership teams and things, that enabled some new things, but it was not sufficient for key leaps forward. I mean, I don't think we could have. We were 3 years into the transformation before the pandemic hit. And if we hadn't had those 3, like if we were trying to start the transformation in the midst of the pandemic, I don't know. I don't think it would have been worth it. I think I'd have just had to wait until things got, back to some semblance of normal and then gone at it. Because when I think of the long hours and the intense meetings that we had to have in those first 3 years, that I don't think we could have done it by Zoom, but that's my opinion. I don't know, Michael, you've worked with different organizations. Did you have maybe you had a different experience?
There are those that did start during Zoom, probably not at the same scale, at least that I've been familiar with. There's no question that the toughest things, as you say, and it's beautiful to hear you emphasize those, are best resolved kind of in person, because they are such big decisions. They feel so existential. There's such a fundamental shift in sort of mindsets and values and beliefs that's needed. There's a lot of letting go as well as embracing kind of new ways of thinking. And that sort of happens, best when people are in person together. One of the comments we've heard a lot of people in Roche have commented that because you've been through the transformation, or at the point you had when the pandemic started, it really helped. It helped you navigate the pandemic much more easily than it otherwise would have been for the organizations.
Yeah.
And then maybe I'd just add on the first question, 100% agree with what you said, Bill. They also have been, so you set up a transformation team in Genentech, for example. There have been transformation teams that were set up and supported by those leaders. There's hundreds of people, across Roche that are dedicated to this, that are, have been trained and become proficient in kind of these ways of working, these new ways of leading, and so on. But it's very much a leader-led thing, exactly as Bill's describing, and that's been really central to the success.
Yeah, it's really hard to answer the question, because I remember at a point a few years ago, someone said to me, "Bill, do you know how many certified Agile coaches we have now in the pharma organization?" And I said, "No, I don't." But in my head, I was thinking, I wonder if we have like 20 or 30 in my head. I'm glad I didn't say it. And then they said, and we have, what was the number? It was like, we have 400. And I couldn't believe it. Now, the reason I mention that is, I guarantee you, neither I nor anyone of my direct reports had authorized that. It happened. So there's been a huge amount of stuff in this transformation that just happened because people at every level took initiative and just did it. And I know a lot of those Agile coaches, they found a way to get trained and they did it. In some cases, they didn't even have, they didn't even have support from their bosses or something. They just did it. So it's a combination of senior level support and a huge amount of volunteer spirit and action.
On that note, I think we should say thank you for a wonderful, wonderful presentation, insight into how this whole transformation has happened. And it's a journey of action and mindset and the heart and feeling and values all rolled into one. So thank you for that journey. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much for having us. Michael, great to see you.
Great to see you too. Thanks so much, everybody. Great to be with you.